The Kabul Airstrike Controversy Narrative, Power, and Strategic Reality. Chapter 1 Introduction The Illusion of Events versus the Structure of Power. What appears on the surface as a singular event, an alleged airstrike on a drug rehabilitation hospital in Kabul resulting in mass casualties, is not, in analytical terms, an isolated occurrence. It is a node within a broader system of conflict, incentives, and state behavior, as well as information manipulation. The untrained observer focuses on the immediate numbers, outrage, and moral framing. The correct lens discards emotional noise and isolating structures. The incident exists at the intersection of three overlapping systems: kinetic warfare, actual military action; information warfare, control of the narrative; and geopolitical signaling, strategic intent. Any analysis that fails to integrate all three is structurally weak. Chapter 2 The Fog of War. Information as a weapon. In modern conflict environments, information is not a byproduct of war, it is the primary weapon. The claim that 400 individuals were killed in a hospital strikes emerges from a party, the Afghan Taliban, with a direct incentive to shape perception. This is immediately countered by Pakistan, which asserts precision targeting of militant infrastructure and denies civilian harm. This creates a dual narrative structure. One side maximizes civilian suffering to gain legitimacy, the other minimizes collateral damage to preserve strategic and diplomatic positioning. The absence of independent verification is not incidental, it is a structural feature of conflict zones. Verification mechanisms are slow, limited, and often obstructed. By the time clarity emerges, the narrative battlefield has already been won or lost. The failure most individuals make is assuming that early reports approximate truth. They do not. Early reports approximate strategic messaging under uncertainty. Chapter 3 Incentive Architecture. Why truth is distorted. Every actor in this scenario operates under a clear incentive structure. There is no neutral party. The Taliban incentives, amplifying civilian casualties, attracting international sympathy, frame Pakistan as aggressor, consolidate internal legitimacy, increase diplomatic pressure, constrain Pakistan's operational freedom. On the contrary, Pakistan narratives include on the contrary, Pakistan's incentives are deny civilian targeting, avoid international contamination, frame targets as militant, justify escalation, maintain operational ambiguity, preserve deterrence. This creates a predictable distortion pattern. Casualty figures tend to be inflated by the attacked party and minimized by the attacker. Targets are reframed to suit strategic needs, civilian versus militant classification. Civilian versus militant classification becomes fluid, often intentionally so. The concept of objective truth becomes secondary to narrative dominance. Chapter 4 The Military Dimension Targeting, Intelligence, and Error. Stripping away narrative layers, the core military question is simple. What was the intended target? Pakistan has repeatedly justified cross border operations as necessary to neutralize militant groups, particularly the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan or the TTP, which it claims operates from Afghan territory. This establishes a precedent for strikes beyond its border. If a hospital was indeed struck, three scenarios exist. Point number 1 Intelligence failure. The target was misidentified due to flawed or outdated intelligence. This implies systematic weakness in surveillance or analysis. Point number 2 Dual use target. The facility may have been used partially or covertly by militants. Civilian infrastructure often becomes embedded within conflict networks, either voluntarily or through coercion. Deliberate risk acceptance. The target was considered high value enough that potential civilian casualties were deemed acceptable. This reflects a calculated trade off rather than an accident. None of these scenarios are morally clean. All of them are operationally plausible. Chapter 5 Escalation Dynamics. From border skirmish to strategic confrontation. This incident doesn't exist in isolation. It is part of an escalation trajectory. Historically, Pakistan Afghanistan tensions have been contained to border regions. The movement of strikes into Kabul represents a qualitative shift. Capital cities are not just geographic centers, they are symbolic and political cores. This shift signals increased confidence or desperation in Pakistani military strategy, a breakdown of previous informal constraints, a willingness to accept higher geopolitical risks. Escalation follows a pattern: limited strikes in peripheral zones, expanded targeting across broader geography, entry into symbolic or high value location. The current situation appears to be transitioning between stages 2 and 3. Chapter number 6. The role of external actors, mediation without control. China's call for de-escalation illustrates a recurring pattern in modern geopolitics. External actors can influence but rarely control conflict trajectories. China's interests are not humanitarian, they are structural. Stability in the region protects Belt and Road investments. Reduced conflict lowers spillover risks into Xinjiang. Diplomatic positioning enhances China's image as a mediator. However, mediation efforts face an inherent limitations. Neither Pakistan nor the Taliban is fully subordinate to external pressure. Both sides derive internal legitimacy from confrontation. Escalation often serves as domestic political objectives. Thus, calls for restraints are predictable and largely ineffective. Point number 7. Civilian infrastructure in modern conflict. Shield, target, or collateral. The alleged targeting of a drug rehabilitation hospital introduces a critical dimension, the role of a civilian infrastructure. In asymmetric warfare environments, civilian facilities can be repurposed or infiltrated by militant groups. Military actors may target such locations of intelligence, such as dual use. Collateral damage becomes both a risk and narrative tool. The distinction between civilian and military space erodes. Hospitals, schools, and residential areas can become contested space. This doesn't justify targeting, but it explains its recurrence. The strategic implication is clear. Civilian infrastructure becomes both a vulnerability and a weaponized narrative asset. Chapter 8. Information warfare, emotional manipulation versus strategic analysis. Public reaction to such incidents is predictable: outrage, moral condemnation, calls for accountability. This response, often, while understandable, is strategically irrelevant. Information warfare exploits emotional triggers, high casualty numbers, civilian imagery, moral framing, innocent victims. These elements are not incidental. They are deliberately emphasized because they shape perception quickly and effectively. The failure of most observers lies in conflating emotional impact with analytical value. Emotional responses do not produce accurate assessments. They produce compliance with pre-framed narratives. Point number 9. Second order and third order effects. The immediate effect of the strike is destruction and potential loss of life. This is the first order layer. It is least strategically significant. Second order effects increase hostility between Pakistan and Afghanistan, reduce space for diplomatic engagement, potential retaliation of asymmetric response. Third order effects: regional instability affecting neighboring states, integration into broader geopolitical tension, Middle East, Iran, US involvement, long term normalization of cross border strikes. These layers matter more than initial event because they shape future behavior. The normalization of cross border violence, repeated incidents of this nature contribute to a dangerous trend, normalization. What was once considered exceptional becomes a routine. Cross-border airstrikes become standard practices. Civilian casualties become expected rather than shocking. International responses weakens over time. Normalization reduces the cost of escalation. When consequences diminish, frequency increases. This creates a feedback loop where conflict sustains itself. Point number 11. Structural weakness: why this conflict persists in the first place. The persistence of Pakistan-Afghanistan conflict is not accidental. It is rooted in structural conditions: porous borders enabling military movement, weak central authority in Afghanistan, strategic depth doctrine within Pakistan, mutual distrust reinforced by historical precedent. These conditions ensure that conflict is not temporary disruption but a recurring pattern. Chapter 12. Conclusion: what this incident actually represents. The alleged Kabul hospital strike is not primarily about humanitarian tragedy, though it is still visible, though is its visible face. It is a manifestation of deeper systems. Competing narratives driven by incentive structures, military operations shaped by imperfect intelligence and calculated risks, escalation dynamics moving towards broader confrontation, information warfare, manipulation perception at scale. If current trajectories persists, the outcome is predictable: continued escalation, increased normalization of violence, and a progressively unstable regional environment.